It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Carla Gomes, the Ronald and Antonia Nilsson Professor of Computing and Information Science at Cornell University. As I mentioned before, she is the director of the Institute of Computational Sustainability and co-director of Cornell AI for Science Institute. Professor Gomes is widely recognized for her pioneering work in constraint reasoning, optimization, and machine learning, and for founding the field of computational sustainability, which uses AI to address major environmental and societal challenges. Her contributions have earned her numerous honors, including the AAAI Feigenbaum Prize and the ACM AAAI Alan Newell Award. Please join me in welcoming Professor Carla Gomes.
I want to thank the NAI and the JJ for inviting me. This is really an exciting event. And today I will be talking about knowledge-centric AI for scientific discovery. And I also want to talk to you about how advancing AI is important for a sustainable future. And in particular, I will like to tell you a little bit about this new area called computational sustainability that's really highly interdisciplinary that aims to use AI and computational methods for sustainable development. The notion of sustainable development goes back a few years, 1987. It was introduced by United Nations, and basically the idea is that we should balance environmental, economic, and societal needs. More recently, Sustainable Development Goals, a set of very ambitious goals from no poverty, no hunger, health for all, economic advancement, and protection of our land resources. These goals were put forward by the United Nations, and computational sustainability is aligned with these goals. So we need to really balance social and economic and societal needs. So I also want to take the opportunity to thank NSF because really they have made a big difference and supported our initiatives. Back in 2008, we had an expedition. These are very large programs that allowed us to really identify core topics in AI, in computer science and sustainability to notice this new field of computational sustainability. And we had a second expedition that really allowed us to build dramatically this network. I also take the opportunity to thank the Schmidt Science for supporting our program, a large program. I think there's also actually a similar program here at Michigan, the AI in Science for postdoctoral students. And as you see, we have also a focus on a variety of science ranging from materials, natural science, biology science, and sustainability sciences. And of course, the students are really the bees that make all this possible, so I would like to highlight them. So let's talk about AI. I mean, AI has really changed our world, and we've seen a tremendous, let me set my timer a little bit. So AI has changed our world dramatically, and we've seen AI systems demonstrating superhuman capabilities like Deep Blue, the Watson, and more recently AlphaGo, really, and AlphaZero. They have demonstrated incredible capabilities. Of course, AI is also going from the academic world to the real world with tremendous impact. You don't even think of the smartphone anymore, but it was a big change, and with all the apps and capabilities. And we have now also automated supply chains and self-driving cars. And of course, the big change is ChatGPT and the large language models. We are now even talking about AGI, artificial general intelligence, and this is an old animation, but as the models grow, we see emerging capabilities. And what is next? I do think that the next frontier for AI is scientific discovery and decision making. A good example of how we should go about that is AlphaFold. But we really need to, I believe, and that's what I talk about, to have fundamentally different approaches for AI for science. And I want to give you some examples of the kinds of problems I've been interested in particular in this area of computational sustainability research. AI to combat the rapid decline in biodiversity. We've done work on different aspects, ranging from joint species distributions to understand, where species are to protect them, wildlife corridors. Another area that we are interested in is AI to accelerate material discovery for renewable energy. And another example is AI for strategic planning to reduce adverse impacts of the Amazon basin hydropower expansion. This is the real Amazon on people and nature. So dams are important, and often we think of hydropower dam as clean energy. However, they can have tremendous negative impacts in terms of river connectivity, fragmenting the river, which affects transportation, fish migration. They can also lead to deforestation. They can also lead to displacement of populations, and also they can flood huge areas, leading to deforestation, and also the flood leads to the composition of organic matter with generation of methane, so actually increase greenhouse gas productions with methane. So we need to think about designing systems that have to really consider all these often conflicting objectives. And so going from the standard paradigm where essentially we design systems with one main objective in mind, such as energy, to this multi-objective Pareto optimization setting. So as I mentioned before, there has been this tremendous AI development, and we are even talking about AGI, as I mentioned before. And this, for the last years, this has been highly data-driven. So it's what I would say data-centric AI. So, however, these data-centric approaches are not suitable and have really inherent limitations for discovery. So we need to think about scientific AI beyond the general intelligence. So I believe we should have knowledge-centric systems. That what I mean is injecting knowledge-centric reasoning into data-driven AI, and so that our systems can have the ability to reason from first principles, factoring in prior knowledge data. So the systems should be able to generalize beyond the training data. They should be interpretable, going beyond correlations and understanding causation. And we should talk a little really about scientific generative AI. There's going to be a panel on that. Also, for decision making, again, the current data-driven approach is very limited. And of course, we have to be able to deal with the large search spaces. And as I mentioned before, we cannot just think in one dimension in terms of objectives. We need to think in high dimensions and this Pareto thinking. So going from single to multi-objective and Pareto frontiers. So one key aspect that I find super excited about AI, I mean computer science in general, correct, is these synergies, these reductions that, and I hope to illustrate during my talk how work that we've done for computational models for joint species distributions really allowed us to come up with fundamentally different ways of tackling problems in materials discovery and vice versa. So this is really a key aspect. And as you will see, a driving force in this is to be, loyal to the applications, even though we are highly motivated to advance AI, and make sure that, our systems incorporate prior knowledge to be able to produce meaningful solutions. So, I don't expect you to understand this picture very busy. This is what I call our subway line. What you see here is the stations are different projects, and then you have different computational themes. I will touch some of these computational themes. I'll talk about large-scale spatial, temporal, and structural modeling in prediction, and highlighting how, by developing joint species distribution models, we could really come up with good ideas for models for predicting properties of materials. I also talk about, for example, unsupervised pattern demixing, and again, the same framework, which also was inspired by joint species distributions, help us. We can solve very challenging problems in materials discovery, namely crystal structure phase mapping, but we can also tackle other problems such as identifying elephant calls or even solving Sudokus. So, and I will also, if time permits, I will talk about, this large-scale decision making and Pareto optimization for the Amazon basin. So, here is my outline. Here I want to emphasize the computational topic that we are addressing. We'll start with multi-label and multi-target regression learning, which is kind of it's a little more the traditional machine learning. But I will highlight that for us to really capture what ecologists are interested about, we really had to make these models interpretable and the role of prior knowledge. I will then talk about deep reasoning networks for unsupervised or weak supervised pattern demixing. Sorry. And we'll see how this very general framework is broad and can solve hard computational problems for materials discovery, like this phase mapping problem, to Sudokus. And if time permits, I will talk a little bit about this large-scale Pareto optimization for the Amazon basin. And again, as I mentioned before, I actually look at this, as developing more ethical AI systems that can really consider multiple objectives for strategic planning of hydropower in the Amazon. Feel free to interrupt me and ask questions during the talk. You may have to shout, but that would be great and make it a little more exciting. So my first topic is multi-entity learning, joint species distribution model, which is really a key question in biodiversity research, is understanding how species are distributed across landscapes and over time so that, it's possible to develop meaningful conservation strategies. So, of course, nowadays we have a variety of technology, all kinds of sensors, but there's one important sensor missing there. Can you guess what the important sensor is?
Humans.
Pardon?
Humans.
Yes, perfect. That's exactly the human sensor. The human sensor is a very sophisticated sensor, and now we actually, eBird and the Lab of Ornithology at Cornell, we have this Merlin that's very good, but still humans are the best. And we have this huge citizen science program with over 1 million volunteers that have contributed over 1 billion bird observations, which is like building the entire state building 5 times. So we combined this incredible information with all kinds of environmental data, and using the spatial and temporal deep reasoning models, we can really have a good understanding of the habitat preference of birds and bird migrations at a very fine resolution. So this actually constitutes the base of the State of the Birds reports. They are released by the Secretary of the Interior. And we have produced, models for over 500 species. And in addition to, all this information, they really guide conservation agencies in terms of protecting birds. As a good example is this program from the Nature Conservancy that called Bird Returns. And this is like a dynamic, high-precision conservation, and the goal is to protect migratory birds in California against drought. So here you see the Pacific migration flyaway, the eBird models. And so based on these models, we can target, the areas that are important for the birds. And they have this very interesting program that is essentially combinatorial reverse auctions, where the farmers submit bids to the TNC, the Nature Conservancy, to keep the target rice fields flooded while the birds are flying. So, rather than buying land, they can just rent temporary land. So this is a win-win. And thanks to this program, the Nature Conservancy has generated over 20,000 acres of additional habitat for weatherbirds in California. So this is only possible because now we are doing this conservation in a very different way and combining Wall Street mechanisms. In fact, I think the person who is heading this program was at Wall Street before, and very advanced computational methods. So what is the key aspect about this program? Is having a very good understanding of the distributions of species. And so basically, what I want to talk to you about is going from the very, more standard single species model to joint species distribution models that are very important. Ecologists are fully aware of species dependence. They actually know, and I admit, I didn't know exactly what ecology meant until I start working with ecologists. But it's really important for them to know the preference of species with respect to the environment, but also the interaction among species. This is super, super important. And they actually have this multivariate probit model that is a presence-absence model that underlies this behavior, but unfortunately, they typically have manually engineered the features, but more important, it's very hard to train this multivariate Gaussian model because of, to understand the interactions, it's hard to estimate the covariance matrix. And therefore, existing models didn't scale up. So what did we do? We developed this framework. And basically, this is actually a supervised method. What we have the input, the features, which, environmental features. And basically, we are going to have an encoder that is going to produce this structured latent space. And the decoder is the multivariate Gaussian model. The MVP, the multivariate probit model. So what is interesting, this sounds like very standard machine learning. However, as I mentioned before, the key challenge here is how to estimate this covariance matrix, which existing models, think VAEs, etc., they just assume a diagonal matrix, so independence. Well, the ecologists said, no, 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 no. We really want to understand interactions, and that's what led us to create this structure latent space. And what you see here, the structure latent space, essentially is going to identify the interactions with the species and the environment to compute the μ's for the multivariate Gaussian, but also it's going to compute the covariance matrix. I'm not going to go over technical details, but feel free to ask me later. But the key point about this is, you know, as I said, scaling up this computation is hard, but we basically find a way of decomposing the variable in two, and then we marginalize, and so we can actually estimate it in parallel. So, but you know, the key aspect is we really had this interpretable latent space. You see here, this model is what you see here is the migrations and, you know, the predictions of 41 species of wobblers. You see they arrived in March, April in the US, and then go north, and then come down in October, November. So this is basically the output of the model. And you see it jointly predicts for 41 species, way better than previous models. You see here the actually Tisning, the projections of the latent space, the habitats interactions, and the species interactions. And I should say, you know, our ecologists actually produced these beautiful dendrograms to analyze it better, and this actually appear in ecology. So, but you know, as computer scientists, we don't do things just for one domain, correct? We always want to generalize, and that's actually a key thing that I ask my students. Please, we need to think general. So the same paper actually had results for multi-object detection for computer vision, mapping of Amazon land cover, and fish distributions, and material science. And in fact, we have had, you know, then more specialized journals, journal publications. We always have to, you know, this computer science have to really demonstrate high performance in computer science, but then we need to also demonstrate that our results are broad and are meaningful in the domain of interest. For example, as I said, in ecology, we had also the same work we generalized for prediction of properties of materials that appeared in Nature Communications and Applied Physics, and more recently, how we understand soil organic carbon. So again, the structure is very general for this, and it's the key component is having this interpretable latent space, and here the reasoning module is to learn the shared low covariance matrix for the MVP. But, you know, again, this generalized, more recently, we have been working on predicting and understanding the soil organic carbon. And this model is highly interpretable. It actually uses these Kolmogorov Arnold networks. I will not talk about this, but for the encoder. The decoder is actually, in this case, a differentiable model. It's actually a climate model that is differentiable. And what's exciting about this model is we are able to understand the 21 parameters of this climate model, the community land model. So, any questions? Or maybe I should move on to the next topic, and we'll have questions at the end. But again, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt. What I want to talk about now is how we can use AI to accelerate materials discovery. And in fact, I will emphasize this core problem in material science that's called crystal structure phase mapping, that basically concerns inferring crystal structures of materials from X-ray diffraction pattern. the X-ray diffraction patterns. This is a very challenging task, and it's essentially unsupervised task. So it is a more general topic is how to tackle inverse problems and basically unsupervised pattern demixing. So very briefly, in high throughput materials discovery, material science can synthesize hundreds or even thousands of materials a day. You see here 3 metals being sprayed. This is like spray painting onto the silicon wafer. So they can synthesize these bottles, these materials, and for example, using annealing afterwards. And then they can use X-ray diffraction to characterize the materials. Well, the key bottleneck is really how to infer the crystal structures of the materials based on X-ray diffraction. And this is like Watson and Crick. They use similar technology to discover the structure of DNA. But here, actually, the crystals can get mixed, and we want to do this in an automated way. So, unfortunately, for humans, this task can take days, years, and still cases they cannot do this. How do we formulate this problem? So basically, here I represent a wafer into iron, aluminum, and silicon, 3 materials. And basically, we collect X-rays at the different points. And what we want to produce is something like this, which basically we want to identify the K pure regions, but also mixed regions, and also identify the X-ray pattern that characterizes each region. So this is like a clustering problem, correct? However, it's a clustering problem that has to obey physical requirements. Phase connectivity, the phases should be connected, and then there's this Gibbs rule, etc. So thermodynamic rules that I don't think it's relevant here, but when we produce solutions, our solutions have to satisfy those rules. And there's also this challenging part that the spectrograms, the peaks can shift because of alloying, etc. So you see here a more schematic perspective where this phase is characterized, this phase alpha has this pattern, this phase beta has this pattern, and this is a mixed phase, so we want to demix them and identify the patterns across the different samples. So we use as prior knowledge some knowledge about other phases that were found for other systems involving the same elements and knowing thermodynamic rules, etc. Of course, this is very challenging. It is unsupervised. We have no labeled data, and we have to deal with noise, incomplete, and uncertainty. So the standard machine learning approaches like factorization methods or clustering, etc., really fail to enforce this underlying physics. And to do that, we need a rich set of combinatorial constraints and symbolic AI. So our approach is really how do we integrate machine learning with symbolic AI to really tackle this problem. So we came up with this general framework, deep reasoning nets, and I want to illustrate this, but when we write papers for computer science, the moment we write something about science, I think the computer science get a bit, not interested, and or they say, well, go somewhere else. So we actually use a more intuitive example to illustrate the approach. And so I'm going to ask you, can you make sense of these symbols? What are they? Perfect, exactly. But if you had to identify them, it would be difficult, correct? Very, very hard, correct? We see clearly symbols that are letters and digits and numbers, digits. But now I will give you some prior knowledge. I'm going to say this actually comes from two overlapping Sudokus. One, I hope everybody knows what a Sudoku is. One is using digits, one is using letters, and I'll give you the Sudoku rules. In case you don't know, you cannot repeat a symbol in a row, column, and block. So this would help a bit because, you would think, oh, maybe there are two A's in the first row, but we cannot have two A's, so they cannot be two A's, correct? So we actually solve this problem using this deep reasoning net that is very much inspired by the ones we used for the birds, correct? And the key thing, of course, with variants and the encoder and decoders are different, but the key thing is that we have this interpretable latent space, and basically this interpretable latent space capture the digit probabilities and the shape embeddings of the digits. And we have a generative decoder. By the way, this is done unsupervised. We don't train on mixed digits. Yet, the system can really make sense thanks to, we do have, the prototype digits and as this reasoning module that is enforcing the rules of the game. That's how this is scaled up. But, this was actually, I came up with this Sudoku game after, we solved this problem and when it was time to actually write the paper. So this is really the motivational problem that we were trying to tackle. And basically, this problem is how to infer the crystal structures. You can think of each of these as a cell in the Sudoku. And here is an X-ray diffraction pattern. So we have 307 unlabeled X-ray diffraction patterns of this Bismuth copper vanadium oxide system. Humans spend like 2 years trying to solve it. They only could solve the binary lines. And what we know about this system is the rules. And these are previous phases. Think of these as digits that had been found for other systems involving bismuth, copper, vanadium, not for this system. So the goal is to really, for each one, is this a pure phase? Is this a mixed phase? If it is, give me the mixtures of the crystals that explain this phase. And essentially, we were able to solve this system, identifying, these 13 crystal structures, phases, and basically it's combining this deep learning with reasoning about the known phases and thermodynamic rules without training data. And in fact, here you see that we have the different regions, and they are explained by different phases or crystal structures. In fact, this system was very hard because you don't really see the pure phases. They are all mixed phases. And, more exciting, this really led to the discovery of a new solar fueled materials, and we published this in Nature Machine Intelligence. Again, as you see, the structure of this network is very similar to the Sudoku and even to the one that I showed for the joint species distributions. What is the key part is, again, we have an interpretable latent space with a reasoning module. This reasoning module is really reasoning about the constraints and allows us to really make sure that we have meaningful results. We also are able to, factor in previous, what's known about other systems, and again, the prior knowledge of thermodynamic rules. You see here I put the comparison of the network, the deep reasoning nets for the mixed Sudoku, and here you have the semantics of the latent space for this particular application, where very similar to the Sudoku, basically the interpretable latent space keeps track of the probability distribution of the phases. In the Sudoku, it was the different digits. and the embeddings capturing the phases. You know, we are given as input this, we are given, you know, other patterns, these stick patterns from known crystal structures, but these are theoretical stick patterns. When experimentally, they are not as clear as this. And so that's what we are trying to do. And we are, in the end, the network is also doing data calibration. So, again, big picture, you know, this very general framework actually has in common, you know, this interpretable latent space where we can really do some reasoning about the specifics of the domain. So for predictive tasks, I gave as example the joint species distribution model, and this is supervised, and for the same for carbon cycle, but unsupervised networks that are even more challenging, I gave the example of demixing Sudokus and crystal structure phase mapping. I think I have 10 minutes, correct? Again, we have a much bigger picture. In fact, we have this Sarah. I always like female names. Sarah is the scientific autonomous reasoning agent. And the vision is to integrate material theory, experimental, and AI for accelerating materials discovery for clean energy. Sarah really encapsulates the vision. Of course, there's still a lot to do, correct? But encapsulates the scientific method, formulating hypotheses, planning, executing, and interpreting the experiments. DRNet is like a component of Sarah. What you see here is a depiction of real experiments where you see this is the wafer. This is the laser spark annealing to you know, zap that can go to very high temperatures very quickly. And then we take either optical data or X-ray data. In fact, we got authorization to have these apparatus in the synchrotron. So because we were doing actually active learning, you know, Sarah was selecting the next spot to anneal, and then the next collection of optical and X-ray data. And as for more in-depth analysis, I talked about DRNet and how really this led to the discovery of fuel cells and solar fuels materials. These are super exciting projects, of course, involving you know, computer science, material science, actually from different, we had a Muri actually, and different departments. Again, I like mentioning the transferability and how these problems, you know, demixing can tackle, you know, real-world problems such as phase mapping, also demixing Sudokus, but other problems that are very related is, for example, identifying flight calls, these little, you know, noisy calls from birds, or elephant calls when we have recordings, correct? So it's also a demixing problem, and there are many others. I'm also working on this very exciting problem that is for metabolite identification, that is identifying the structure of molecules from mass spectrometry. So let me now wrap up. I think I have about 7 minutes. And talk about a very different problem, and this is really concerns more decision-making, and the setting is the Amazon, again, the real Amazon. You see this beautiful river, and basically, the problem concerns planning the location of hydropower dams. There are already about 200 dams that have already been built in the Amazon. They are planning 400 new dams, and as I mentioned before, you know, typically dams are built for energy. So that is the main goal. However, they can affect and impact several ecosystems, fish biodiversity, sediments and nutrients, river connectivity that affects transportation, navigation, deforestation, displacement of populations. They can flood farmlands, and also, as I mentioned before, they can even lead to the increase of greenhouse gas emissions because they flood huge areas that lead to the decomposition of organic matter. So from an AI perspective, we think about more ethical AI decision systems that go from single objective to multi-objective optimization and Pareto frontiers. So basically, we want to understand the trade-offs with respect to the different objectives of the different solutions and them portfolios. Here, I illustrate the notion of Pareto frontier. Basically, we have just two dimensions, hydropower energy versus ecological value. If we don't build any dam, of course, we preserve all the ecology value, but we have no energy. If we build all the dams, we get a lot of energy, but we destroy our ecological values are very low. So here is a solution in between where, we get this much energy and we still get some good ecological value. But, this clearly, for the same energy level, this one would be much worse because it has a much lower ecological value, correct? So this is dominated. And so we want to identify the solutions that are along the Pareto frontier. Here you have an example for better connectivity. These two solutions have the same output in terms of energy, but clearly this one is better because it places the dams further in the mountains, and so the rivers can flow. So from a computational point of view, this actually is a very challenging problem, and we want to compute the exact Pareto frontier, or at least approximate it. And what we are doing is we are developing, in fact, this was quite exciting as a computer science because we were able to really apply this fully polynomial time approximation scheme. So that means that we have algorithms that actually run in polynomial time, and we provide guarantees. The key aspect here is how to do the dominated solutions, which we can do in order n log n. So it's very exciting. And we use also a hybrid strategy. Just for two criteria, what you see there is the Pareto frontier for all the dams, assuming that we had planned this Pareto frontier before building any dam, which we didn't, of course. But if we had, this would be the Pareto frontier. Well, look what we are now. These are the existing dams. So this shows you how we really foregone these environmental benefits, or alternatively, how we foregone these power earnings. So going forward, this is the best we can do. So we have looked at many other criteria. And in fact, we are doing this optimization thinking about all these criteria. And here is, I mentioned that the dams can actually be dirtier than coal. And when you have these, counterintuitive results, that's when, I have a good publication there. So here, the Pareto frontier here is upside down because here we are trying to minimize greenhouse gas emissions. That's why you have a different shape. And what you see here is that this is the greenhouse gases. These solutions are dirtier than coal. So if you are not careful, you could really have dams that are dirtier than coal. Here I visualize the Pareto frontier for other criteria, but just two at a time. Of course, we actually have shown that you can couple hydropower dams with photovoltaics, and you see over there. And this allows you to actually move the Pareto frontier to the right and have, better outputs. And again, visualizing, in fact, I will tell you, our big challenge now is we have, because our algorithms are so efficient, we can produce a Pareto frontier with millions of solutions. So navigating this Pareto frontier is not straightforward, but we are now working on how to visualize this. Of course, in the end, the decision makers have to provide their input in terms of what matters for them, correct? And so you see here a representation where we actually are just restricting the solutions around 80 gigawatts, and you still see there are many, many possibilities and the impact across all the different criteria. Again, this is a super multidisciplinary team. This is me in the Amazon, actually the Marañón River with my colleagues, so very exciting. And again, I'm about to wrap up. The big picture here is these approaches are very general, and for example, what we are doing for the Amazon, it transferred very nicely to tackle this problem, the 30 by 30 problem. This is the United Nations goal of protecting 30% of land and water by 2030, and we are studying that problem for freshwater fish. And in this talk, I highlighted, joint species distributions and how we could also use this for materials properties, or soil organic carbon. I also talked about pattern demixing and inverse problems. And, I illustrated with the Sudoku, but really the more meaningful problem is this crystal structure phase mapping. And also, I mentioned that this is relevant for demixing flight calls or elephant calls. And we are also using this similar approach for AI metabolomics. The big message is that this computational sustainability and AI for science is a two-way street. On one hand, we inject computational thinking that provides insights in methodologies and solutions into other fields. But, on the other hand, we also benefit because we are exposed to very challenging problems, especially if we are loyal to them. And that's a key rule that I have with my group. Let's not just make up, properties that don't exist, like convexity or this or that. So if we are loyal to the problems, we have to solve them, that will advance our field. We also typically support very interesting formalisms and concepts from the scientists that really advance our own field and hopefully help us advance AI for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the motivating and inspiring talk. I have a question about sustainability and AI. So we know that AI can amplify existing social biases in society. And so how as we get a deeper relationship between the interdisciplinary fields that need to get together to solve these complex problems, I wonder if, for improving local governance and also local economical resilience that are also important for sustainability, we will probably need to add covariates to this biodiversity modeling that we're seeing here that is being used as data products to make decisions. So how to integrate these other social dimensions into this biodiversity landscape to really have these social outcomes also guiding the modeling efforts, I think seems to me an open problem still. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about this.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's absolutely the case. And, that's exactly why I talked about, the last example is trying to emphasize that aspect that, typically we design systems focusing locally or particular objectives like hydropower dams is a good example. They are really designed to, produce energy. But it's often the case, these systems have tremendous negative and actually conflicting objectives. So navigating these landscape is very challenging. And I actually think AI can make a difference, because AI can really reasoning in these very high dimension spaces that are beyond human comprehension. It's challenging. And in the end, it's even challenging for, as I mentioned, we have produced these incredible solutions. In fact, our Pareto frontiers that are really trying to identify these trade-offs, correct, lead to, literally millions of solutions. So the humans, we also have to identify in the end our priorities. So I mean, this is not just a computational problem, correct? I mean, maybe the computation is a challenging part, but the humans, making decisions, that's a whole different conversation. Very good question. Thank you.
I'll ask one question while maybe the next speaker goes over to set up. So I love the generalization of the methods that you mentioned, right? From modeling bird species to Sudoku solving to material science and discovery of new materials. The first part of my question is what enables this generalization? And the second part is more, I feel like, for people in the room who may want to do more of this interdisciplinary work. How would you say that one can cultivate this ability to see real problems in other domains beyond their home discipline and really deeply understand the domains?
Mm-hmm. A very profound question. And that's how do we see this? Well, and it's not obvious. Of course, understand that, and, maybe a related question is, how do I pick the problems, correct? And as guidelines, when I'm, I like at Cornell, lots of people would like to work with me. I mean, especially because my interactions with different science, but this can be overwhelming. And as rules, I would say, the first one is really work on problems for which you have the highest level of expertise, because you don't want computer science to be pontificating about things they don't know a thing about. So you have to find collaborators and work with them. And to be honest, this can, even formulating the problems sometimes takes 6 months or more to pose the right questions. Then, I select problems that are aligned with my interests. I can give you the example of phase mapping. Back in, I started working on that problem in 2007. And a colleague from, this student, a postdoc then, came to me and, talked about just standard machine learning problems. And I said, well, I'm actually more interested in, really combining, and I see Mike Wellman there, really my background is really reasoning. So I actually want to find something where, you need to really make sure that your solutions are valid, and that's how we got. So I looked for a problem that would require some kind of combinatorial reasoning. That's how I came about with the crystal structure phase mapping. Interestingly, the same student had been working on the joint species distributions, and there's also some kind of, combinatorics, because we are not looking for predicting the distribution of one species, we are predicting for a collection of species. So this is a more high dimension problem, correct? And in fact, you know, by being inspired from that problem, that's how we were able to solve it. We said, oh, we can do this interpolated space. Before we are trying, you know, matrix factorization, all kinds of these things. So, you know, it is a bit, you have to be guided by your own interests because you need to be able to contribute to the research. But also, you know, keep your mind open. And in general, I really, for every problem we tackle, I emphasize we need to see the generality of our approaches, not just this particular problem. And you know, that's a conversation you have to have even with your collaborators for them to understand that, you know, both fields, you know, typically you want to advance material science, but also computer science. And that leads how you choose the problem. So I don't know if I answered. Well, thank you again. Oh. Thank you, Dana.